Hello, I'm really happy to be with you today to share some digital solutions for online learning. And as we know, we are in a new realm. There is a new reality for many of us. And I can only think of it as a bit of culture shock, kind of like the culture shock maybe our students feel when they first arrive. For many of us, we've had just a couple days to prepare our classes. And moving from the mindset of being face-to-face with students to being in this digital environment, it's quite shocking. And we may feel as though we're, pushing this giant boulder up a mountain. But I want to tell you, there's actually a silver lining, I think, behind all of this. We know, and research tells us, that students actually interact with digital content at much higher rates than they do from content in a textbook. And let's just wrap our heads around that for a second. Our students are digital natives for the most part, and this environment is not that foreign to them. Perhaps learning in the environment is new, but using the tools are not going to really impede our students' learning. They do see value in interacting with content online. And there's more good news, right? We know that students who have high levels of interaction with other students in an online environment report higher levels of learning. We also know that when students interact with one another online, they're outperforming the students who have little student-to-student interaction. So there is this direct link between students-to-student interaction, performance, grades, and satisfaction. So I'd like to, we'll do some focusing on how we can build student-to-student interaction in the digital environment. And that's really the key in the digital environment, that content can't be just directed to the student, or the teacher interaction just to the student, or the student interaction just to content, or student interaction just to teacher. We need to build in opportunities for student-to-student interaction, for that collaboration. Because just like in a face-to-face experience, students actually learn from their peers. And that whole sense of community building is quite important when we think about an online environment, probably more important in an online environment than in a face-to-face class. So we'll be talking about these digital solutions, and we'll look at different skill areas and how we can build that all in. But I'd like to think about this acronym before we get started: LEARN. So the L here is language teaching, right? And we can't forget, first and foremost, this is our goal. So sometimes we let the technology take control, or we get consumed with the technology instead of really focusing on our purpose here, which is that language teaching. That E is engaging. So we want to teach in a very engaging environment. That means content has to be engaging. We want our students to be active learners, right? So going back to that, we don't want them just to receive the information, but we actually want them to be active, to be collaborative. Resourceful. It's about providing our students a lot of resources in this unique new environment. And lastly, environment. So language teaching in an engaging, active, resourceful environment. And that environment is new. It's going to be a digital environment. So we have to start out thinking about language teaching, that L. And working with my colleagues the other day, after 2 days of technology training, I asked them, what do we know about language teaching? And the room was dead quiet. And it was quite interesting because we were so consumed with the technology and how do we get up to speed with technology, we forgot about our real purpose here, right? And one of the colleagues spoke up and said, well, it's all about that affective filter, making sure students feel comfortable in the classroom. And that is key. It's key in the digital environment as well. So what do we know about language? That it's interrelated and meaningful when it's whole. It's an integrated process, and it's a process, right? It's a process. The time exposed is critical to acquisition. So a lot of the work I've done has been in blended learning and flipped classroom, and I always believe in using these digital tools because what I saw is that when students had access to content outside of the classroom, that was really critical to their acquisition. Students who use those tools outside were actually acquiring language at much higher rates than the students who only use the language in the classroom. And here's that affective filter, right? That classroom atmosphere really affects learning, whether it's a face-to-face classroom atmosphere or a digital environment. And, another colleague had suggested, well, you know what I'm going to do the first day? I'm just really going to make sure my students feel comfortable. They feel comfortable in the world we're living in right now, and that they feel comfortable with the tools. And I think, again, that's really a critical piece when launching your online class. We also know that learners with language need to take a very active role, right? So language isn't something that just can be received, okay? It has to be given as well. So they need to take that active role. We also know that the more engaging content is, the more motivated our students are, and thus the more engaged they are in the learning and teaching process. So let's talk about engagement. Well, when I think about engagement and I think about a class in which students could really engage, we want to make sure that we have proven pedagogy. We want to make sure it's user-friendly. We want to make sure that we give immediate, meaningful feedback, and we have to build in that collaboration and interaction. So we're going to go into depth on the proven pedagogy, but I just want to touch for a second on that user-friendliness. What that means in a classroom often is clear directions, right? So when we're giving students a task, that our directions are very clear. In the online environment, it's the same. We need to really make sure that we have very clear directions and clear expectations of the students. Feedback is even more important in a digital environment. Because we don't have that face-to-face contact, we don't have that nonverbal communication, we need to make sure that we really express it in feedback. And we'll go deep into that collaborative, interactive environment as well. So let's start out by looking at our proven pedagogy. So what do we know about our pedagogy? Well, we know we have to have a clear learning path, right? And, we might think of, oh, well, I have lesson plans. This is great. This will work wonderful. I can just translate this into a digital environment. But that clear learning path needs to be transparent to the students as well. When we're in a class, they might ask the question, well, what do I need for tomorrow? Or what are we going to be doing tomorrow? Or when is this due, right? So they need to see that clear learning path. It needs to be laid out for them. And keep in mind with digital natives, they live in a very infographic, visual setting. And so, a lot of text is not going to work for this population. So we want to make sure that we communicate that in many different ways. And that really leads to the second point, the variety of learning activities. So, in the classroom, we might do one or two tasks, and then students might do some work at home. We have to provide that variety in the digital environment as well. So of course we want to do those traditional kind of activities, but we also want to build in a high number of other kinds of activities that appeal to different kinds of learners. And this, you can do a lot within the digital environment. We can bring in some gamification. We can bring in some polling. We can bring in some fun activities where students have to compete against each other. You can also really leverage the tools that are in there as far as videoing, conferencing, and I'll show you the tools. We'll go through lots of them. But, I'm thinking about like a past tense activity. I might have students, do something on camera if we're all in class at the same time in a synchronous environment, and then ask the other classmates, what did Juan do? What did Mina do? And so we can actually use it like we would use it in the classroom. And then, of course, we would need that high quality content, right? Content is king, yes? So we want to make sure that we're using content that is curated, that is of high quality. So in the pedagogy, we also think about what we normally do in the classroom and how does that translate into the digital environment. So some of our pedagogical strategies would, we would normally do a little bit of lecturing. We might do some pair and group work. We might play games. In listening, we might do lots of listening and speaking. Project-based learning and other collaborative tasks are also very big. And, these don't have to cease because we're not in a face-to-face classroom anymore. We can actually really use and leverage so many of the tools to build these kinds of things in. And actually, there's probably some really cool tools that we can use. So if you haven't been doing any project-based learning before, now is a great time to try that. So thinking about the lecture and what we do in a face-to-face class, and then what can we do online, and what are some tools and resources we have. So online, when we think about face-to-face lecturing, we have real-time synchronous lectures. Okay, so you can still lecture in real time to your students. So your students could be sitting there, you could be using Google Hangout, Zoom, Skype. You could all see one another and lecture could be happening. And I just want to mention, I'll share at the end a list of all the resources. Many of the resources I'm talking about right now are free. And I'll show you Zoom in a minute, one of my favorite free resources. You can also lecture in an asynchronous mode, which means that you create a lecture in the digital environment and you post it. So if you are using a learning management system, an LMS, something like Canvas or Blackboard or Moodle, you can post your narrated or voiceover lectures in that environment. If you do not, there are also free resources you can use. Private groups on Facebook or other social media private groups as well. You can screencast. So screencast is when you're actually recording your computer screen. And so you might be teaching a lesson on writing or reading and finding the main ideas. So I could have text up on my computer. I could be highlighting text and talking at the same time. That's screencasting. And I can use tools like TechSmith Snagit. Right now they're offering that tool for free, which is a very easy to use screencasting tool. PowerPoint also allows you to narrate, so you can have it up on PowerPoint. You can use some of the PowerPoint annotation tools. And so those annotation tools allow you to draw and things of that nature. So I'm just going to give you an example right now. So I just turned on my annotation tool and I did this. So I can do that within PowerPoint as well. Another great resource is the Azar resource site. On the Azar resource site, you can find wonderful PowerPoints that you can use in your digital environment. These might be things we already are using in class, and we can use them in the digital as well. So here is some screenshots of Zoom. So Zoom is basically a conferencing, web conferencing tool. It allows you to have a whiteboard. It allows you to screen share. It allows you to have breakout rooms. So you can see right there, you can get a basic plan for free. You can have a 40-minute limit on meetings with 3 to 100 people. And you can, this is me just showing you how you can be typing on the whiteboard, or you can actually be writing on the whiteboard. This is how you can choose the tools you're going to be using. So I was using my desktop there. You can have many different, you can have all your student pictures there so they can see each other and they can see you as well. So it's a great free conferencing tool. Here's some PowerPoints that you can narrate. So this was one I was just doing on like lesson planning, right? And the best way to do lesson planning. And I just took my PowerPoint and I actually screencasted it. So that means I narrated it. So it's me talking, going through the presentation.
When you're in PowerPoint, you will be able
and you can hear a little bit of that.
So you're going to go up to slideshow and you're going to click record slideshow. You'll be able to narrate and record that slideshow.
Okay, so you get an idea of that. Another tool to record is that TechSmith Snagit. So it's screen capture and recording software. And right now they're offering free access through June 30th. So you can create all kinds of lessons. You can record meetings and presentations. So if you don't have an LMS, this is another great tool along with Zoom. You can do software walkthroughs, demos for students, record some academic lectures or other learning content. So it's a wonderful tool that is right now for free. So here's something that I think I created in Snagit. It's just on sentence types.
Hello. Today our lesson is on sentence.
Oops, sorry, that went to the next one. Here's another one on Snagit. And this is just me in my own office giving a lesson on adjectives. So it also allows you to use your video camera so I can lecture the students. The files are then MP4 files. So again, if you do not have an LMS like Canvas or Blackboard, you can share these in a variety of ways. You can share it through a closed Facebook group, or there are some free LMSs. So this is a great tool to lecture, whether it's in an asynchronous way, so not real time.
Hello. Today we're going to talk about adjectives and what adjectives do.
Okay, so that gives you a sense. And students actually love to see you in your home with the things you have. It makes it more real, really breaking down that affective filter. So A's are grammar resources. Here's the website to that. You can download all of these grammar PowerPoints, which are fabulous. You can actually download them, and if you wanted to narrate them yourself, you could do that. Okay, so you have the ability to narrate these PowerPoints as well. So just some best practices when lecturing in an online environment. There's a couple things I want you to remember. The first one is this whole micro-learning concept. So when I say micro-learning, think about Khan Academy. Khan Academy is so successful because the lessons are very short. And we know that in the digital environment, learning happens best in very small chunks. And so we think about chunk, chew, and check, right? So your lecture should be a maximum of 10 minutes. So whether you're doing this synchronously at the same time and your students are sitting there, or if you're recording yourself and posting it, think about a 10-minute maximum lecture. So, you can lecture for up to 10 minutes, then give students some time to chew on it, right? And think about Bloom's taxonomy. If it's new content, we want to make sure we're practicing that understanding and remembering first, right? We don't want to ask students to go right now and create with it. We want to make sure that we're remembering and understanding. And then you can bring the group back together and do some kind of formative assessment. And these can be really fun in a digital environment. You can do some kind of polling or some kind of ungraded survey. And the goal here is really to check the learner's understanding of what you delivered, not to measure mastery of the content at that point. Because just think about it, if we're in the class, we would stop. Are you okay? Do we understand? Do we have questions? We can see their faces, right? So chunk, chew, check, 10-minute maximum lecture, then give an activity for students to chew on it, thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, and then checking. Using some kind of formative assessment, you can use some polling or something just to check their understanding. So here's an example of chunk, chew, check. Here's a lesson I created on nouns, for example. So this was done asynchronously. So even though I was meeting my students face-to-face in class, they had to watch this at home, this lecture, and I think it's only about 2 or 3 minutes. They watched this lecture, And then they had to complete this task next to it. And this is just a little gamification tool that I created with widgets called Materia. Very, very easy to use. And so the lesson was on nouns. I narrated the lesson. And then they had to go in and play this game where they had to put the nouns in the right category. Is this a people, is a place, or a thing? And this was obviously a level 1 class. They were really quite successful with this task, and many of the students were doing it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. So if I asked them to do an exercise in their book, they would probably only do that exercise once. Okay, so again, having access to the content, doing it in a variety of ways, and making it very appealing to students gets them to engage with content at a much higher rate. So let's talk about group and pair work, because we may think that this is more challenging to do in an online environment, but really there are so many tools that we can use that can actually make group and pair work more productive and even more fun for students. So we can use discussion groups through discussion boards. So again, if you're using an LMS like Canvas or Blackboard, discussion boards are great for group and pair work. You can do group assignments. Group assignments can take place if you're using Google Classroom with Google Docs or Slides, or even if you aren't using Google Classroom, you can still use Google Docs and Slides. Group assignments can take place in Zoom rooms. So what's really great, if I set up a Zoom and I can place students in different rooms, I can have them work on a task together. I can pop into different rooms to see what's going on, just like we would in the classroom, where we can walk around to each group to make sure the groups are on task. You can record group activities through the Zoom rooms as well. The LMS, Blackboard, and Canvas, both allowing students, when you create assignments, they both allow you to group students together, which is really great as well. So this might be, I'm creating an assignment, and it could be some kind of project. For example, I want students to redesign, a cafeteria or something, or solve this world issue we're having right now. And so I would create that assignment, and I would put my students into groups. So I decide who's in what group. Then they would work on that collaboratively. A couple things I do have students work on in the learning management system are wikis and blogs. So a wiki is where all students collaborate and they all add things to it. A blog is kind of like a daily journal. So I would have students, I might post a question up for the blog. Each student has to put their daily reaction to that. Blogs are great to use for free writing. So if you do any kind of free writing, you can also do them orally. Okay, so if you're teaching a listening speaking class, students could respond to those orally as well. So let's look at a few examples. This is an example from Canvas. So once again, if you are using a learning management system like Blackboard, Canvas, Moodle, students have the ability to record. So they can not just respond in written text, but they can respond with an audio or video. So wonderful if you are teaching a speaking class and they have to give presentations. What I especially love about this is when students are working on presentations and they have to give a video or even an audio. Students are doing these 5, 6, 7 times because they know their classmates are going to see them. They know their teacher's going to see them, and they're a little more conscious about their language and their behaviors online because they watch themselves and they want to make it perfect. So what happens when they're doing it 5, 6, 7, 8 times? They're actually improving each time and really practicing the language. So you could record a digital message, a video message to your students here, and then students could respond with an audio or video message as well. So here's a wiki that I was doing with one of my classes. So this is a vocabulary wiki where I would put the word and the context, And then I might assign one student to write the meeting, another student to put the part of speech, another student to make a sentence with it, another student to write the definition, and another student to tell me if there were any collocations that went along with that. So students would collaborate, and then I also assign, okay, you're going to write the meeting and you're checking part of speech. You're writing the part of speech and you're checking the sentence. And so they're up there editing each other's work. And it's really, really a great collaborative tool. Kind of something we would do in the classroom on paper, right? Wikis are also great for creating a student writing activity. So I can have a writing up there, and I might have not a clear topic sentence or not a clear thesis statement or no examples. So I would ask students to go in, add an example here, check the thesis statement. So great tools for students collaborating together in a written environment. So some best practices here for group and pair work. It's important that you intentionally set partners and groups. And I have found, and research tells us, that groups do work best in threes. Okay, so thinking about that number 3. Setting clear directions and expectations. And so we want to make sure students know exactly what they have to produce, especially if you're meeting face-to-face, for 50 minutes. And when I say face-to-face, I mean using some digital tool, conferencing tool, and then they're doing something after. They don't have that access to come find you in your office per se. So you want to really make sure your directions are clear and what you expect from them is well communicated. I always, in the digital environment, no matter what level I'm teaching, I'd like to provide students with a sample of what they're to produce. So I know at certain levels we may say, oh, well, we don't need to, give them an example. I think in the digital environment, it's really important that they have a sample of what they're to produce. It's also important to monitor those online group spaces. So if you're going to be using, Zoom, and you're going to be using Zoom rooms, it's important to go in there and see what the students are doing in that environment, just as we would if we were walking around the class. I also think it's really, really important for students to complete some kind of peer review of the activity. If they know that they have to, complete something with their peers, and then they do a review of that, it actually gives more authenticity, I think, to the activity. Because what happens is you can do a review where, were you able to collaborate? Did all the partners work together? Is everybody producing what they need to produce, kind of thing? So that way you can use that as well as an assessment to see if students are really on task. And really understanding the task as well. So you can frame those all different ways. But when I do group projects online, I do like to have my students do a little peer review of that, just to see how the process was for them. So we have that clear learning path, that variety of activities, and now how about some high quality content? So when we talk about high quality content, we love to use content that's curated, right? Content from our textbooks. And many of our texts now live in the digital environment as well. And so I'm going to share with you a few shots here from MyEnglishLab. And so the first one is from Next Generation Grammar. So if you're familiar with that, there are some videos built in there. English with Jennifer does all the videos. So students can watch short micro lessons. They're 1, 2, 3 minutes long, and then they're doing those chew kind of tasks, right? So we're chunking that lesson, and then they're chewing on it, doing some kind of activity. So MyEnglishLab is essentially a learning management system, but with all that curated content. Okay, so if you're using one of those texts and you're fortunate enough to have codes in your text, you already have an online class, essentially, right? And you just need to learn how we can leverage that effectively. So MyEnglishLab, here are lots of different texts that we can use with MyEnglishLab, and there's a million more, right? There is a session on Friday on using MyEnglishLab, and I highly suggest attending that session as well. So it is that learning management system. It has messaging in there, so students can email you. You can message students. It has a calendar, which I really love because students can see on that calendar what's due and when it's due. There are assignments, so you can assign work to individual students or you can assign work to the entire class. You can decide how often, how many times students get to do that assignment. You can time those assignments as well. And there's very robust curated content. And when I say robust, I'm talking about that variety of learning activities. And so, just looking at this shot here, they have some different grammar activities, but then there's listening and speaking and writing, and this is for a grammar book. And so really giving students an opportunity to listen to the grammar and speak with the grammar and then write with it as well. And then we have our gradebook in there. If you're using a Canvas or a Blackboard, you can actually download the gradebook from MyEnglishLab and import it into your Blackboard or Canvas gradebook. Okay, so if you're having students do some exercises in here and taking tests in here, you can import that again into your Canvas or Blackboard gradebook. And then there's a variety of resources there. There's some great videos, some great audios, some PPTs, some PowerPoints for teachers to use as well, depending on which MyLab you are using. So here's what the gradebook looks like. I actually covered all my students' names, so that big blue are all my students. So you can see I can get all their assignments and how many they've completed. I could go deep into my gradebook, which I'm sure Janae will cover on Friday, but I could open each individual student and really see how they're doing. I can even do a question analysis, so I can see what are the questions my students are missing. And you can see right here, you can export that, right? So we can export it as Excel, we can export it directly to Moodle. So you have some choices there to export that gradebook as well. So something new that Pearson is working on, if you're familiar with Nearpod, Nearpod is a student engagement platform. So it's essentially a tool that students use. They can use on their mobile devices, and you can push out different kinds of games or different kinds of learning activities. Students love Nearpod. I used it this fall in my writing class with my level 1 students. You can do collaborative discussion boards. You can do some timed activities where they have to race each other. So I'll just give you a preview of this. It is a modular grammar program that we're working on. So you can see we have, adverbs of frequency and present continuous. And so there are whole lessons here that can be launched to students. And within those lessons, there are some videos where students are getting explanation on the grammar. Again, micro lessons. So if we look at this one is about 2.5 minutes. Okay, this lesson this looks like it is on present continuous. And after the lesson, then it does take you up that Bloom's taxonomy. So students move from remembering and understanding all the way up to create. The great thing about Nearpod lessons is it allows you to deliver the lesson as a live lesson or a student-paced lesson. So what that means is if I want all my students working on it at the same time, I can shoot out a live lesson. And, this is where they'll be able to compete against each other. They'll see each other's responses instantaneously. Or I could do it as self-paced. So if I want one particular student to work on a lesson because they're struggling, or I want the whole class to be able to do it, but I don't necessarily need them all to do it at the same time, I can do it as self-paced. It's really a fabulous tool, so I suggest that you check it out and look for Pearson's Modular Grammar lesson that will be out shortly. So again, what is it? It's really a repository of engaging interactive grammar lessons. It can be modified and adapted to each program. So we know that our students' needs differ, and we also know there's this huge demand for these micro lessons. So these lessons can actually be carried with the student. And it's really about that flexibility in delivering both tailored and personalized learning. I just put here a little summary kind of all the tools that we kind of talked about and how we can use these. So we have, our skills there to the left, what we might do in a face-to-face class, and what we would do in an online class, or the tools and resources we can use to replicate some of these things. So just, looking at writing, we might do lecture, in-class writing, peer review. So online, we can do this through discussion boards, through Google Docs and slides, through Zoom rooms, through Canvas and Blackboard timed assignments, through Wiki's blogs in your LMS. So there is a handout attached, and this is on your handout as well. So we can't forget about that learn, the language teaching in an engaging, active, resourceful environment. We really want to make sure that we are using those principles of language teaching, right? We do not want to forget that. That needs to come first and foremost. We need to make sure that in content is engaging, because we know when content is engaging, the more motivated the students are. The more motivated the students are, the more they'll learn. We also want our students to be active, right? So not just passively receiving the information, but active. And then we want to provide students with a variety of resources. And I'm going to share with you a link here that is daily, hourly evolving, that teachers from around the world are putting together lists of free resources that can be used in your digital environment. And that's our environment, right? We want to make sure that we're using the tools and we're using all the capabilities to give students the best learning experience we can. And so we think about technology. I think about 6 things. I think about integrating it, extending it, access, 21st century skills, appealing to our students, and data. So integrating it really is about making it transparent for the students, making it accessible and ready to use. It's also about supporting our SLOs. When I think about technology, I think about how it really allows me to extend my classroom walls, right? And so even if I'm meeting, synchronously with my students, even if we're doing video conferencing, I still want to extend those classroom walls. I still want to give them opportunities to learn. I want them to have access. I want them to have access to the lessons that I deliver in class, but I also want them to have access to other content. And they need to be able to have a way to have access 24/7, right? I want to flip some course content. That means I want to maybe push some of these short lectures out to students before we come together. And when I say come together, I realize it may be, through video conferencing. But if I push content out and then we come together, and we can still have a very communicative social environment through digital conferencing. I want to make sure I'm building 21st century skills for my learners. So they're going to be using mobile devices. We need to build in some micro-learning. I want to appeal to my learners, and I know that appealing to them is about interactivity. It's about collaboration. It might be about giving them lessons on demand. So if I see that a student is struggling with a certain structure, I might need to go out and find some resources to share those with the student. And data. The great thing about technology, another silver lining here, is that we can have access to real-time data. I can see exactly my students' strengths and struggles. As I mentioned with the MyEnglishLab, I can do a question analysis. So I can see that, half my class is missing this one question. Well, that's real-time data that allows me then to drive my instructional practices. So really it's about integration, it's about extension, access, 21st century skills, appealing to students, and using data to make some really good instructional decisions. This is an amazing resource that just came to me. Amazingeducationalresources.com, teachers from around the world putting it together, free resources. You'll see Nearpod on there, you'll see Zoom on there, you'll see tons of other stuff on there. There is a lot for K-12, and I suggest just doing a control find on your keyboard and typing in ESL, and you'll see tons of resources for ESL. So I thank you for all your time. I know when we did this live, we had lots of questions. So feel free to reach out with any questions that you may have. Thanks and good luck to you all.